Hello and welcome to Man's Model Moments. Revell is one of the world's oldest and largest model companies, going back to 1951 and having more released kits than any other single manufacturer in the world, with almost 9,000 to its name. They do, however, have a bit of a variable reputation, and personally I used to always avoid Revell kits until the mid to late 1990s, when they started producing some really excellent quality products at pretty good prices. Some examples are their 172nd aircraft, like the Focke-Wulf FW200 Condor, the Heinkel HE-177, and their Luftwaffe 1946 kits like the Horten and the Flitzer. Now, I haven't bought a new Revell tooling since the noughties, and unfortunately, even then, without doing your research, it was difficult to tell whether a kit was a new tooling or one of their really old moulds, which of course can lead to disappointment if you're expecting something of 2020 standard and you get something which was produced in the 1970s. Unlike Airfix, who have been doing a great job, as far as I can see, of labelling their vintage classics range, Revell can be a bit of a roll of the dice if you're not properly prepared. Personally, I can't recommend the ScaleMate site enough for this purpose, as it shows exactly what a kit's origins are. I, and probably many others, don't mind buying an old tooling if I know what I'm getting into, and I'm paying an appropriate price for that. Now, Revell released their 2023 catalogue online earlier in February, so let's have a look at what they're bringing to the table this year. Now, as I did for Airfix and Italieri before this, I'm going to start with new toolings, then kits with new parts, and finally reissues. And in each section, I'll go from the largest scale downwards. So first up in new toolings, we have some releases in the Star Wars universe from the Mandalorian. And first up is the 1/3 scale, which is probably a scale that most of us have never done, is the child, Grogu, the baby Yoda. This is a bit of an odd one. It's a very large scale, it's going to be quite a big kit, but I can't imagine it's going to have a huge amount of pieces. I have seen some of the sprues, and I guess if you're a Mandalorian fan or a baby Yoda fan, this is quite a novelty piece. It could even be a present for somebody, or you could make it and present it as a present to somebody. But it's not a typical modelling subject. I guess it's to really pull in from the Star Wars, the Mandalorian franchise more than anything else, and probably to coincide with Season 3. For me, probably not a kit I'll get. It's, as I say, it's an odd one. It's also a different scale to the Mandalorian bounty hunter himself, who is next released at a 1/9 scale. It's a bit odd to me that they would release the child not in a 1/9 scale. I would have thought maybe the Mandalorian with Grogu together in 1/9 would be good. Maybe Grogu comes out as a 1/9 scale kit afterwards, but having a 1/3 and a 1/9 that you can't match up, having Baby Yoda and the Mandalorian different scales, seems a bit odd. So we stick with the Mandalorian for moving to 1/24th, 1/25th scale with the N1 Starfighter. So this is the Starfighter that he picks up after the destruction of the Razor Crest. Spoiler for those of you who don't know that. And it's a modified Starfighter from the ones that you see in the prequel series. 1/24th scale, it's going to be quite big, and it's got quite a lot of exposed stuff on it. And I think for a Star Wars universe person, or something as a bit of a palate cleanser from normal model releases, this is quite an interesting one. It's one I might even consider looking at and picking up. It'd be quite interesting as well to see it in comparison to the 1/24th Airfix Spitfire, just in terms of size and things, not obviously anything else. So that's quite an interesting one. I don't know if there's any figures with that. You know, sci-fi models do give you an option to do a lot of weathering and create some nice effects, so they are quite interesting to do as a bit of a different thing from aircraft or AFVs. And, you know, obviously, lovers of the Star Wars universe or sci-fi in general, this is quite appealing. It's got a lot of exposed stuff, so there's a lot of option for super detailing as well. So I think, you know, this could be quite a nice kit. Sticking with that scale, we have the Aston Martin DB5 from the Goldfinger James Bond film. Now, this is an easy click kit, and I don't normally include those in these sorts of reviews. but I've included it here as it completes a whole set from the James Bond franchise that Revell are releasing this year. So next we have a set of cars, 1/24th and 1/25th scale, the 71 Mustang Boss 351, the Corvette C8 Coupe, and the 71 Oldsmobile 442. Now, I'm not a car modeler, I don't have any specific interest, nor do any of these hold a special place in my heart, but I'm sure there'll be a lot of car modelers out there that will look at these with some anticipation. Stepping down to 1/32nd scale, we then have the Gloucester Meteor F3, the first edition. So obviously there have been a lot of Meteors coming out in the past few years. This obviously adds to that lineup. There are not a lot of other details about it at the moment. Not something that I'm going to be looking at personally. It's a bit too big scale-wise for me, for the Meteor. Meteor isn't a subject that I, again, have a particular love for. I've got several Meteors in 48th scale and 72nd scale, so I don't feel the need to add a 32nd scale one at this time. No releases in the new tools section for 1/48 scale, but stepping down to 1/72nd, we do have a new tooling of the F-15 Strike Eagle. I have done just one Strike Eagle in the past, and that was a Tamiya kit, I believe. So a modern Revell tooling of the Strike Eagle might be interesting. I have to see what the price point is and what the kind of initial views on that are before I take the plunge, but that could be something that might tempt me. Coming down to the smallest scale that we have new toolings in, we then have the German submarine Type 9. So specifically this is U-190, and Revell already do a 1/72nd scale kit of this. It's huge, it's like over a metre long, and it's over 100 pounds. So scaling it down to a 1/144 scale makes it a little bit more manageable. And for me, actually, this is quite an interesting release. Depending on the price point, this could be an interesting thing. Could also be good for a diorama. The difference in scale from that and an anti-submarine aircraft flying over it, I think, could create some good perspective. So moving on to releases that are prior mouldings with new parts, we step straight in at 1/24th, 1/25th scale, and again back into the James Bond franchise. The first one actually is the 2023 tooling of the Ford Mustang that we mentioned in the new tools section, but this time it's been repackaged for the Diamonds Are Forever film from James Bond. This is exactly the same tool that we mentioned in new toolings. It just happens to have the decals and paint scheme, etc. for the Diamonds Are Forever, and I believe it's in a gift set. So again, nothing new to say there, but we then move on to a few others which are slightly older tools. We have the Volkswagen Corrado. This is a 1990 tool originally, and this is to celebrate 35 years of the VW Corrado, special box, probably new decals, etc. And also we have the Land Rover long wheelbase, and then we have the 69 Camaro SS 396. Now, this was a gift set from a 1960 tool originally. It's had new parts along the way, and 2022 also put new parts into it. But those three all older tools. Now, 1990 is kind of on the cusp of when Revell started improving things, so we'll have to see exactly what those look like. Again, I don't know the Volkswagen Corrado tooling previously when it was released, but I expect there aren't many differences from the previous iteration of it. I presume it's going to be mainly, again, in this gift set, new decals format. So then dropping down to 1/32nd scale, we have a couple of aircraft, the H-145 Eurocopter. This is a 2005 tool. It's been released several times by Revell in various different iterations. This one, again, probably a new set of liveries, maybe some extra parts. Again, no clarity on that at the moment. And then we also have the Messerschmitt Bf109, the G2G4 model. This is a 2013 tool, so I expect it's probably decent. Not sure what the new parts in there, probably just new decals. Stepping then to vehicles and 1/35th scale, we have a couple of Leopards. These are both prior tools from Revell. The Leopard 2 to start with, a 2012 tool, and the Leopard 1 is a 2015 tool. Again, not sure what the new parts in there are. But again, maybe some options here for those modelers who want to look at tanks that are currently being sent to Ukraine. So some possibilities there for modelers that want to do that. Moving to 1/48 scale, we have the Eurofreighter Typhoon Blackjack. Now this is a 2006 tooling, which has a very unique complete wing markings. Now, I don't know the 148th 2006 tooling from Revell of the Eurofighter here, but I expect this is just a new set of decals rather than any additional parts. Moving down to 1/72nd scale, we have a couple of different subjects, land and sea. We have the patrol boat, the PT-160. This is a 2018 tooling. And again, not sure what the new parts are here. And then the SWS Flak 43 and ammo trailer. This is a 2011 tooling, but from the company Mako. So, not sure what new parts Revell are putting in there to actually make this unique to them. But that's quite interesting, and like Italieri, Revell have bought in other toolings from other companies. They have several companies that they work with. Monogram, we know that they have had a lot of releases with in the past. Now, I don't know the company Mako, so it'd be interesting to see what this actually looks like when it's released, and it's a relatively interesting subject. 72nd scale, it's going to be quite small, but if you already got those kind of things or want a diorama on that, that's quite an interesting subject. In 1/144 scale, we then have the Destroyer Class 119. This goes back to a 2008 tooling from Revell. It's going to be quite large being in 1/144 scale. Again, I don't know, I'm not a ship modeler very much myself, so don't know exactly the details on that one. But again, I'm sure some people will be interested to see that one added to Revell's line. Now, on the subject of reissues, we come into the murky waters where Revell kind of get themselves, I think, into a bit of trouble and have got into their bad name, if you like. Because a lot of the releases here are across a number of decades, and there is no way from the box to tell that. So we can start off with the BMW Z8 from The World Is Not Enough, going back to the James Bond franchise, and the Citroën 2CV from For Your Eyes Only. Now, this is a 2000 and a 2011 tooling respectively, but then the next one we go into is the Mercedes-Benz Unimog, which is a 1985 tooling. So if you're expecting something up to 2020 standard and you get something from 1985, when let's face it, the technology wasn't the same as now, and the crispness of most models, excluding a lot of Japanese models, was far from what we expect today, then that's going to be quite a disappointment. And I think this is where Revell does themselves a bit of disservice. Yes, they have this massive range, but I think labelling things clearly so that people understand what they're getting would actually help them in the long run and improve their reputation, because I think they're very capable of making some really good toolings and kits, but they get saddled with this because they release something as new, and it dates back to 1985 or even further, as we'll see in a minute. So carrying on with the 124th, 125th reissues, we have the Bussing 8000 with trailer. That's a 1997 tool. And then we have the 1966 Shelby GT350, which goes back to Monogram, as I mentioned before, some of these collaborations that they do, to 1981. And this one, it's not even like they're adding any new parts. They're just reissuing a kit that dates back, 4 decades. So Revell, this is where you really have to do your research with Revell. Because the next one, Jaguar E-Type, is a 2020 tool. From the boxes, there's no particular way that you would know the difference. So if you bought these two kits in the same shop, got them home and opened them up expecting them both to be the same quality, you would be disappointed. And I don't know the 1981 Monogram kit of the Shelby GT, but I'm sure it wasn't a 2020 tool standard. If it was, kudos to them, they were 40 years ahead of their time, but I doubt it somehow. We then have a bunch of releases which Revell put as their modelling the American way kits. Not really sure why they're putting that, whether it's to distance themselves from it in some way. A lot of these are reboxes of prior other kits. So we have the Pontiac GTO, the Judge, that is a 2004 Testers release. We have the Ford Torino Cobra, that is a 2000 Monogram release. Then we have the 68 Firebird, that's a 2001 tool, as far as I can see, purely Revell. And then we have a Jeep from 1977 and Monogram. We have a 57 Chevy Bel Air, 1962 Revell tool, and a Chevy Square Body Street Truck from from 1974 from Monogram. So you can see there, I think that epitomises Revell's problem in a nutshell. In the current modern era, where people have slide molds, China has a lot of different companies releasing really good kits. Tamiya and Hasegawa and Fujimi are all releasing, top quality kits. Airfix have stepped up their game. The native Revell toolings are actually very good, and they're kind of muddying the waters by releasing all of this old stuff with no real clarity. So your expectation of getting the kit out of the box, it's a roll of the dice, as I mentioned before. In 1/35th scale, we then have the Unimog 404. That's actually a 2022 ICM release. And the GTK Boxer, which is the 2011 Revell tooling. Going to 1/48 scale and back to aircraft, we have the Beechcroft Model 18. Again, this is another ICM release in 2014. And the Dassault Mirage 2000C, which is a 1982 monogram kit. I don't know what to say. We have the Dornier 217 J1/2, which is probably the 2019 ICM kit. Scalemates aren't 100% sure on that one. And we have the 50th anniversary Northrop F-89 Scorpion, which is a 1990 Revell tool. So again, we've got a huge range there of different manufacturers and different decades being represented, ostensibly as Revell. Coming to 1/72nd scale, we have a little bit better news in that Revell seem to have now, for a number of years, had an arrangement with Bandai and clearly label these on the box, probably part of the license agreement. So the first one we hear, again, back to the Star Wars universe, we have the Bandai TIE Interceptor. So that's a 2016 Bandai tooling released under the Revell name. We then have a couple of 1/72nd scale Revell toolings for Star Wars. We have the Y-Wing Fighter, the Millennium Falcon. That was a 2017 and a 2000 tool, respectively. And then we have the Mandalorian Razor Crest, which is a 2021 tool. Going back to the James Bond franchise, we have the Eurocopter Tiger from GoldenEye. That's a 2006 tool. And then we have a Eurofighter Pacific Exclusive Edition. That's a 2016 tooling. We then have the 75th anniversary kit for the Berlin Airlift. That's a 2015 tool. That's going to be a big model. Then we go into military vehicles. We have the ATF Dingo 1. That's a 2005 tool. The M1A2 Abrams, which goes back to 1997. And the Panzerhaubitze 2000, which is a 2001 tool. The Panzerhaubitze I did it around that time. It's a really nice kit, and I expect, again, maybe some interest with some of these vehicles being sent to Ukraine. Gives a modern setting and a bit of modern relevance for some of these vehicles. However, to temper that really nice 2001 release Panzerhaubitze, it's quite a big chunky kit, it's got good detail. We then have the Krupp-Plotz KFZ 69 with the 37mm pack. And that is a 1982 release. That is 1/76 scale. It's the old Matchbox release. And Revell bought the Matchbox toolings when Matchbox went bankrupt. And they've just been releasing them under the Revell brand. They're neat little kits. They were quite cheap at the time, when you could buy these. And they are not 2020's kits. They're neat. They're cool little things. I mean, the 3.7 centimeter pack on this kit is actually quite cool. But if you're expecting something which was produced in the last 10 years, that's going to be a disappointment. So again, it doesn't hold up, for instance, to the Panzerhaubitze. Now a lot of this depends on pricing strategy. I know the Airfix Vintage Classics are often a lot less expensive than the new toolings, which is right and proper, right? Because they've already had a lifetime of use out of them. The main cost in a tooling is in the actual tooling itself, the stainless steel, cutting that stainless steel. So just hashing out something which is 40 years old and squeezing new plastic into it costs almost nothing. So to put that against something which has all the development costs, to me it feels a little bit wrong. And I appreciate that these things have a lifetime, they have to recoup it over that lifetime. but it's not comparing eggs and eggs. Going to HO00 scale, 187th, we have the Standard Express Locomotive BR03. Couldn't find out when that original tooling was, but again, locomotive enthusiasts that are familiar with these Revell kits will probably know exactly when that is. We then go to a very odd scale, but sticking with the Star Wars franchise, this is 1/106th scale. Where that came from, I'm not sure. This is the Imperial Shuttle Tidarium. This is a 2006 tool, and obviously these all came out with the prequels or after the prequels when that renewed interest in Star Wars came out, and they're re-releasing that now. Sticking with the space theme, but going over to James Bond, we have the Moonraker in 1/144 scale. That's a 1977 tool. I mean, that is probably older than a lot of people that are now modelling. And then the very next item is the Bandai Razor Crest, which is a 2021 tool. The Bandai kits tend to be pretty good. So the difference between those is chalk and cheese. We have a set for the 50th anniversary of the Alpha Jet, 3 kits in one. That's a 1993 tooling. We have a couple of Airbuses then, the A330-300. This is a 1993 tool again. And the Beluga, the massive A300-600 ST. That's a 1997 tool. I actually have that kit. It's not bad. So those of you that missed it over the past years and haven't seen it at model shows, you get a chance to pick that up again now. And to round us off, we go back to space, but in reality rather than science fiction. And we have the 21st anniversary of the ISS with the 144-2000 tool International Space Station. So what can we say in conclusion for Revell's releases for 2023? Well, it's obvious they do go quite hard for some of these big franchises like Star Wars and The Mandalorian, James Bond. So we have a lot of releases, and they've got quite a lot of bandwidth in this as well. The new releases here and the re-releases, the ones with bits added, they all fit into an extended universe that they have. They've got quite a lot of Star Wars kits now, all the way from Snowspeeders and ATSTs all the way up to the modern Mandalorian stuff. And the James Bond stuff, if you've got that interest in the franchise or any of those particular cars, that kind of has its own niche. Revell also adding to its 1/24th, 25th scale releases. And a lot of these old re-releases, though, come from way back. I mean, we've got all the way back to the mid-60s, long before I was alive. So again, I think the 2023 catalogue represents all of the good and the bad of Revell. They've got some really good franchises going, they've got some good partnerships going, but they kind of muddy that by putting all of these really old kits. I don't know, some of these are just reissues, there's nothing new added to them, and they come from 4+ decades ago, where the standards of modelling were much different and expectations of modellers here were a lot different. In one sense, I get re-releases from those kind of areas because people who missed them that time round, or either they were too young or they just missed them at the time or they weren't interested at the time, now get a chance to actually do those models. But be clear about it. Don't try and disguise it in a new flashy box. And this is what I always found about Revell. The boxings look nice, but they don't reflect accurately what's inside. If they had an old 1960s artwork on the box, you would pretty much know, okay, that's one of their old releases. Much in the way that Airfix have done with their vintage classics. Airfix, I think, have done a really good job of clarity by putting, this is a vintage classic, so old mould, you could put it out there. It is not a new tooling. It is not going to be a 2010s, 2020s standard of tooling and of moulding. So you're not going to get those modern kind of looking sprues. It is going to be something that looks much different, much older. In terms of their new releases, they do have a few interesting things from a personal point of view. The submarine, actually, the 1/72nd submarine I would never do because it's just too big and too expensive. Where the hell would I put it afterwards? The 144th, it's still big, but I think that makes it manageable, and I think it could be quite interesting. And I quite like German submarines, the way they look. They're quite cool from that period. So that could be interesting. The Strike Eagle, again, maybe. Not so much the Meteor. Again, I have some Meteors in 48th. It's a pretty big aircraft by itself, quite chunky. 32nd scale, it'd just be too big for me, I think. So some interesting stuff there. Some of the kits with new parts. Really depends on when the original toolings were, what they've added. There are some interesting things here, but I think there are also some stinkers. you know, the Camaro, a 1960 tool. I mean, that's, yeah. I mean, something which is 63 years old. Yes, it's had new parts, 2022, I get that, and that's all well and good, but somewhere in the heart of it, there are still some 1960 mouldings there. So, yeah, I think it's a bit strange. Elsewhere, you know, things like the patrol boat, PT-160, that's possible. I've not done something like that for a while. I don't, again, tend to go for boats, but I think something in that sort of scale, 72nd scale, could make it an interesting diorama, but then that really depends on the figures. But with 3D printing now, you can kind of get around some of these things. So there are some interesting things here. There is some new stuff, but the reissues and the kits with new parts, again, depending on what those parts are they just new decals or do they include actual new parts? It really depends on the releases and what they look like in the end. Give a judge on that. There's some interesting things there for sure. But again, Revell, I think they're really doing themselves a disservice by having these really old releases which aren't clearly labelled as such. Anyway, we'll see what they actually end up releasing and see actually what it looks like. I'll look forward to joining you then. That's all for this instalment of Man's Model Moments. If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button, subscribe to the channel for more like it, and share this video with others you think would also enjoy it. You can also follow me on Instagram, Twitter and Facebook, and if you're feeling generous, then I also have a Patreon, which is absolutely the best way of helping me to grow the channel and produce more content like this. With that, I hope you have plenty of modelling moments of your own, and I look forward to welcoming you on the next video.